Hello, my name's Delbert Glenn Henry, known as Del, or when I grew up here in Potosi, I was known as Butch Henry. I have been chosen as the spokesman for the Lester Henry Century Farm, as I am at 72, I am now the oldest living Henry of the Henry family with the Henry name. I have three cousins who are older and another one is younger, first cousins, but I am the oldest with the Henry name. Lester Henry moved to Missouri from Kansas back in the early 1900s, around 1902, and had a farm in Berryman, Missouri. He later then sold the farm in Berryman, Missouri, and married Iva Blanche League Henry in 1902, and they purchased the Henry farm here, purchased 80 acres of farm at this time. The land later grew. He kept accumulating land and buying other farms, and grew to eventually 435 acres. This land was originally part of the initial Spanish land grant to the United States, who then granted the land in this area to Moses Austin. Moses Austin founded this area in the early 1700s, before Missouri even became a state in 1821, but this land was part of the initial land grant from Spain at that time. When Lester Henry moved here, they had 10 kids. 8 of the kids was born at the Berryman farm that they had, and the 2 youngest girls were born here on this farm itself. My father was Delbert Henry. He had a home across the road here where I grew up from the time I was 18 months old until I moved out when I was 21 years old. This land here, along the stretch of Highway 8 West, the farm started at Bates Creek and continued out Highway 8 West, and it continued over on this side to the north area all the way over to Highway 185, accumulating approximately, like say, 435 acres. The homes along here, Lester Henry gave each of the 10 kids 1 acre of land to build a home on. 8 of the 10 kids had homes here. The land that he gave them, 1 acre, was actually the worst part of the farm. During the late 50s and 60s, the road here was known as Henry Stretch for a couple reasons. Initially, it was known because 8 of the 10 Henrys is all that lived here. Later in the late 50s and 60s, it was known as the local drag strip for the area. That the road up here to the bridge that goes over Bates Creek here was a 1/4 mile. So the cars would line up here and race to the bridge, which was the old bridge, which is very narrow. So on weekends there was much chrome and fenders left on the bridge sometimes there. The cemetery across the Highway 8 here was part of the original farm. When the farm was started to be sold off in 1960, the land was sold. My cousin Kay Henry Haverstick bought those fields across the road. She later sold part of the fields over there to what became Redbud Memorial Cemetery, and that is beside and in the back of the house that I grew up in, Delbert Henry's home. And I have a little piece of the land there, in that I have 4 cemetery plots behind the house that is directly outside of my bedroom window that I lived in for 20 years. The farm was here. There was the home, there was a horse barn, a cow barn, a sheep barn, and several of the sheds here. Right now, the only things that's left is some of 2 or 3 of the original sheds, the chicken house that is behind the second home here, which is still standing. My grandfather farmed the land. They had raised cattle, hogs, and I assume that they raised sheep, since there was a sheep barn. They also raised crops, wheat, corn, and various crops here. Boys would dig tiff, or barite, which is known as tiff, and lead on the farm here for their spending money. Lester Henry passed away in 1960, and at that time some of the farm was sold off. My uncle, Lester Jr., or Pete Henry, acquired the farm, most of the farm at that time, and built a house here to live on with his wife Helen. He then took over ownership of the farm and continued farming till he passed away. And then my cousin, it was his son, James E. Sonny Henry, and his wife Susan, took over the farm and continued to farm the land at that time. He farmed the land until, and as part of the Century Farm, we made the application back in January for the Century Farm. Sorry to say that Sonny passed away in 2020 and was not able to accept the presentation as the Century Farm at that time. The farm has, though, continued in the Henry family, as his daughter, Deborah Henry Thompson, inherited the farm. She still lives in Uncle Pete and Aunt Helen's house, her grandparents' home here on the farm. She has a son by the name of Sean who lives here with her on the farm, and a daughter by the name of Janae. Janae recently had a new baby, Michael, who is now the 6th generation that has contact with the farm. So it is passed down from Lester Henry to Lester Pete Henry to Sonny Henry to Debbie Henry Thompson, and then now she has a daughter and a son and a granddaughter. So it's now 6 generations of the Henry farm here in the past 100 years.